what I'm going to try and communicate to you guys today, that RTB really is this transactional backbone which you can do targeting and optimization over. So one of the things that may help you to understand better what the RTB technology is to do a brief history lesson of how unsold media was traditionally trafficked. So the old way, networks closed exchanges, the idea was that you're a publisher, you have some unsold inventory, you partner with the network, and the network helps you to sell this inventory, right? Or an exchange, right? Either way, the model from a technology standpoint is quite similar. So this is great. I mean, it helps you sell your inventory, but one of the things that you see when you're doing media buying is there's always an imbalance of supply and demand, particularly when you start doing targeted buys, because there's only so many users in a certain segment, and you maybe only have access to a certain number of publishers. Publishers would like you to do fixed buys at fixed CPMs, but how can you guarantee that you're going to do a fixed buy when you're really trying to reach a very specific niche of users that may or may not actually show up at this publisher, right? And so for a buyer, you end up having to strike deals with many networks or many exchanges. Then from a campaign management standpoint, you have a lot of problems, right? Because you're having to manage a bunch of campaigns in a bunch of different places. You lose things like the ability to do frequency capping across your different buys. And for publishers, you know, there's always the fill problem, right? Where you're working with the network and how many buyers does this network have, and how does the network do their backfill for the publishers to buy these impressions? And how are you maximizing your CPMs when there's all these other buyers out there that you may or may not have access to? So this is where RTB almost comes about. So then the sort of next evolution is the idea of the yield optimizers, right? And these guys came out and said to publishers, hey, we understand your problem, and what we're gonna do is instead of you having to deal with a bunch of different networks and trying to manage your relationship with all these guys to sell your inventory, you just give it to us, and we're gonna work with all of these guys. We're going to implement algorithms that allow us to optimize who we sell to and when we sell it to them, right? And so for the publishers, that's a great deal. And they say, hey, this is great. My reporting nightmare goes away because I've got one point of contact to sell my inventory, and they're going to maximize my CPM. So one of the ways that this works, though, is this is still with the traditional tag passback mechanism, right? Everybody's familiar with the notion of a default or a CPM floor or something like this, right? Where if a buyer doesn't want to pay over a certain price, then they spit out some other tag and you go to some other buyer or some other ad server, right? So the buyers all end up in a line, right? End up in a row. So there's a sequence of buyers that the yield optimizers decide, hey, this buyer goes first because they're buying the most impressions or they have the highest effective CPM or whatever the rules happen to be. And that was great. I mean, it was a great evolution. But there's problems, of course, right? So for the buyers, they're in a queue. So you're not doing any real-time optimization. It's very difficult to do real-time optimization around which buyer gets which impression, because this is mostly a reactive yield optimization model where you would look at reporting on a daily basis and say, hey, these buyers have a bunch of new campaigns, they're paying great CPMs, so these buyers are gonna get higher priority than these other buyers, right? So the optimization from the yield optimizers is not happening in real time, and also one of the big things that we've seen is really high latency, because when you have these users that are bouncing from ad server to ad server to ad server, it takes forever for the tags to load. There's really high discrepancies in reporting, so you have ad server systems that will report sometimes up to 50% difference in impressions sold than a yield optimizer or publisher ad server. Reporting is a nightmare, fortunately not for publishers, but for the yield optimizers. And for buyers, chopped off some of my slide there, but for buyers, there's a lot of variability in the users and inventory that you have access to. So again, if you want to do anything like forecasting, or you want to have some sort of consistent delivery for your campaigns, it's much more difficult. So out of this, what was born was RTB, right? And RTB was a solution to these problems. And hopefully that will make sense. So most of the yield optimizers turned into SSPs. Now, when I say yield optimizers, SSPs, that doesn't mean they're not yield optimizers anymore, right? This is still what they're doing. It's just the evolution of a name, just like we've always had with everything. I mean, I think DMP is now an AMP, right? I don't know. I'm a tech guy, so I don't have to remember these things. So networks and other new players get into the DSP market and develop new technology, right, to solve these problems. So the core idea is that you have, on the supply side and the demand side, transactions that are happening between them in real time. The big key difference is that instead of having this sequence of potential buyers that the user is being sent to by the SSP or the yield optimizer, the users are being offered to all the potential buyers at the same time in parallel, right? So this picture looks very similar to the last one with the yield optimizers, but the difference is that these calls are happening in parallel instead of this guy gets priority today and this guy gets lower priority today, right? So this adds a lot of efficiency to access, right? And you may note on here, I put an exchange on here as an example because what's a DSP, what's an SSP? Well, a lot of exchanges are both, right? There's a lot of exchanges that act like an SSP and act like a DSP, which increase delivery and reach for buyers and also increase fill and can boost CPM for sellers, right? So a lot of times you'll have an exchange that really does act in both roles. So when you think DSP, SSP, the higher level point you should remember is that what's important is the capabilities, not what they brand themselves as. So in terms of efficiency for buyers, there's a bunch of things you get out of this. So one is working with a centralized system. Working with a centralized system makes it more streamlined to do campaign booking and trafficking, and also means your reporting's in one place. You can do frequency capping across your different buys, regardless of where this inventory is. There's still the ability to do closed deals. So if you have a relationship with publishers, you can actually still do closed deals. Remember earlier I mentioned that RTB is a technology and not a business model. And you need to remember that because there's constant evolution on the business models. I think RTB as a technology is around to stay, but that the business models will continue to evolve. A really great example of that are private exchanges, right? The notion of being able to do a deal direct with a publisher over RTB, which keeps things nice and clean because for the publisher, they can continue to work with the same SSP, and for the advertiser or buyer, you can just work with the same DSP. And if you have a publisher and they're already working with somebody, odds are that SSP is integrated with your DSP and you can set up a closed deal. So this is one example of new business model on top of RTB, and there will be more. So I think the most important thing is that your choice of technology platform doesn't affect your inventory access. Now, some people might argue that at a finer level, but in general, if there's a big SSP out there with quality inventory, any major DSP player is going to be integrating with them, right? So the value proposition of a DSP or a buying platform is no longer just about inventory access, right? Which I think is a very, very cool thing because it means we can focus more on things like targeting and optimization, which is pretty important. So for sellers, same type of thing, right? Same mantra. The choice of your platform doesn't affect your buyer pool. You can still organize preferential deals. This is the notion of the private exchange, which I'm not going to go into too much because you probably heard about that all day long because that's the new hottest business model on RTB. And competition for inventory, right? So the more buyers you have, the more potential competition you have for inventory. Now this starts to open the whole question of transparency and targeting and data, which I'm not going to go into too much because that would be another talk, and I already cut this deck down from 50 slides to about 25. So if you want to know more about that, you can buy me a beer later. So takeaways from kind of just the technology view is just, one, it's actually pretty complicated because in the past, this inventory selling has been done by bouncing a user to a bunch of different places. The way that RTB works is actually server to server. SSPs talking directly to DSPs as opposed to an SSP just sending a user to a DSP or another DSP. If that doesn't make sense, it's not that important. Thomas, I broke your laptop. Yeah. So, but it is complicated. So the thing is that it requires infrastructure because if you want to buy on AdX, for example, over RTB, you have to have some sort of data center or infrastructure that is near the location where their inventory is coming in. Because I think the last time I checked, the requirement was something like 50 milliseconds complete turnaround time. So there's a big investment in technology. So this RTB in its native form is really not for small advertisers, agencies. This is not something you want to build yourself unless this is one of your core competencies. And if you don't believe me, just think about this. What's your core business and how much are you going to invest and spend on RTB? And are you going to be able to compete with Invite and Turn and all these other guys in terms of their optimization and their technology when this is their bread and butter, right? So that's certainly something you should be keeping in mind. So simplifies broad inventory access, right? I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing is huge access to inventory. And it's like the fire hose of impressions is going by, and you can sit there with just a little eyedropper pulling out just the ones you want, right? That's one analogy for what it's like. So yeah, it's the media transaction system for the next generation of targeting and optimization. Well, thank you, Windows user. And I thought I was off the hook. It's like, questions. So targeting and optimization over RTB, right? Because I think the point that I keep saying that, so I guess maybe there's about 20 points I want to make, but this is just your media transaction network. It simplifies access to inventory in a large quantity and allows you to actually do a better job of targeting and optimizing your ads. This is the important thing. So most of the DSPs out there, as they'll tell you, and I don't want to go too much into their functionality because there's about 20 guys on the other side of that door that would be happy to give you a spiel of their technology and products and sell you on it. But they have built-in traditional targeting, so you want to do frequency capping, you want to do brand safety targeting, whether it's native or with some other vendor. You want to do day part targeting, geo-targeting, all these types of things are built in. A lot of the DSPs are also building DMPs, right? Because they know that data is important and they want to get in on that action as well. And also they're making it easy for you to bring in third-party data. Now in Germany, unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of third-party data that actually works or is privacy compliant or anything else yet. That may change, hopefully, but I think the more interesting place longer term is to actually bring your own targeting, right? Whether you're using a DSP's DMP or some third party, find something that works really well that you can use to drive your targeting and optimization. So when we talk about targeting and optimization, for me, when I think about these two things, they're one and the same, right? Because they have to work in tandem. You can't just target, hey, I want to target these guys in this group, and then go away for 2 months and hope it works out. So you really have to optimize your campaign around the targets. I mean, there's things like lookalike modeling, looking at what's your control group, who's your customers, how much are people engaging with your ads. There's a whole lot of that, and you could be having bad creatives. You could be targeting the wrong group. You could be using bad data. It's the right group, but you actually have the wrong users in that group because the data is not great. So optimizing with DSPs for traditional targets and using the DMPs for optimizing around your data-driven targets is very important. So how relevant is this, right? I mean, it's great if you have some amazing technology, but it doesn't matter if nobody's there, right? How many people would be on Facebook if there were only 2 people in the world on Facebook? Well, there'd be 2 people on Facebook. But I mean, the point is you have to actually have people using this for it to really be relevant. So these numbers are from a study commissioned by PubMatic used without their permission. So basically, IDC ran around and did a bunch of surveys of agencies and other folks around how much they were spending on RTB. And out of this, they went and tried to build a forecast. I left the US off here so you could actually see what the numbers are for Europe. Yeah, so I mean, you can see that the prediction for Germany is quite significant, and that's in US dollar millions. So that's about, in 2015, that's about 10 euros, right? Sorry, bad joke. I'm American, so I know how bad the dollar is, right? So as a percentage of display spend, maybe this is a little bit more of a relevant number. And again, this is from IDC, and there's, as you know, there's a lot of hype in this industry, and so you never know how accurate these numbers are, but in general, people are saying they're using it, they want to use it, they're going to use it more. So you can see, I heard on the DSP panel earlier, somebody said 50 to 60%. IDC doesn't agree, but I don't necessarily trust IDC either. I think the takeaway from this is just it's being adopted. People are using this. It isn't going away. So you need to understand how it works, and you need to figure out how it fits into your business model and come up with a plan for adopting. So as far as that's basically what I just said, for buyers, stay competitive. You need to do this because you're going to be able to have better ROI for your clients. You're going to be able to expand your own margins, just efficiency from a carbon standpoint, right? I mean, how many people do you have running around managing stuff in different interfaces and doing Excel dumps, which then get mailed to 3 other people and transitioned all along the way? I mean, for an engineer, that's just a total nightmare. And one of the other kind of interesting things to note, too, is that with RTB, advertisers that couldn't get into display now can, right? Because if you're an advertiser that has a very targeted niche audience, and traditionally you go in and you do a buy with a network, how do you reach that audience, right? You may not actually be able to get enough reach with just this small network with the target you have if it's a niche audience. So because, again, the fire hose of inventory going by, smaller advertisers really can get in and make display work. So I think that's cool because there's a whole bunch more people that can move from doing search into display, and that's great for people that are in sales, which is not me. So sellers, look, if the buyers are moving to RTB at some point, you have to as well. And I know there's a lot of fear, but I think that a lot of the fear has to do with some of the business decisions and business models that have been advertised and associated with RTB. And those are constantly changing. As a result of this fear, you've seen the private exchange model, right? That's where this comes from. They wouldn't have gone and developed this product if there wasn't a big hesitation from publishers' part to get on for RTB. So yeah, you just kind of have to do it and figure out what works for you. Start with a private exchange if you're a publisher. So, like I said before, RTB is the transaction system, but the data is the real intelligence. This is where it gets interesting. So now you actually finally have a system in place where you have the reach and the volume that you want from a campaign perspective. That's great, because that's one less thing you have to do. You can spend way less time doing media planning, for instance, right? But then data, right? I mean, this is what this is all about. You have to be able to use the data, and you have to be able to target over this system. So, Matt's general rules for data. Not all data is equal, right? I mean, it's this sort of data crazy, hey, data is great, but it's not all the same, right? You have to know who your audience is. So if you don't, then you should figure that out before you go and try and run a targeted campaign. Performance is subjective. I mean, this is a big one, right? Because you talk to some people and it's like, hey, no, we're still totally all about clicks. You talk to other people, no, we're just about conversions. I talked to somebody the other night who said we don't even track view-through conversions. Now, whether or not you're billing on that is completely different matter than actually understanding performance and engagement with your campaign or your advertiser, right? So don't trust your gut feelings, right? This is why we have technology, is so you can stop doing that because you're generally wrong. And plan your targeting around your sales cycle, not just around who's my group, my big Uber group, and we're just going to target them, and then we're going to, what do we say, press our thumbs and hope that they actually show up and convert, right? So users go through many stages to actually become a customer or to engage with a brand, right? There's creative level optimization. There's making sure you're actually targeting the right users. There's measuring how much users are actually engaging with your site but not converting. All these things are very interesting things that can help you to optimize your campaign, because if you're just looking at 2 ends of the pipe, one is an impression and one is a conversion pixel firing, you're missing a whole lot of stuff in between and a whole lot of opportunities to optimize. So you really do want to treat these different groups of users differently. So not all data is equal, right? What data are you using? Do you know? A lot of third-party data is smashed together from, do you even know where? How many other people are they selling it to, right? Because if there's 1,000 other buyers that all have this same segment, I guarantee you're going to pay higher CPMs when you're buying on RTB because you're going to have all these people competing with you. And how fresh is it, right? This is also important and relevant, because if you've got an auto shopper segment from 6 months ago and you go spend a whole bunch of money running a campaign against that, I hope I'm not your customer. So knowing your audience. Sorry, I'm kind of going fast. Should I slow down, or is everything okay? No? All right. I'm just paranoid now that I'm not going to make it to the end of the deck. So do you know who your customers are, right? A lot of people don't, or a lot of people assume and trust their gut feeling. So you can measure this. There's tools. right? Deploy tracking pixels or profiling pixels on your sites early, before you do a campaign go live. Actually go look, do audience discovery, right? Do these types of things, and then you can do all sorts of great stuff like applying lookalike models to your existing customer base, right? Your assumptions about who your customers are may be wrong, and for your campaign, who are you trying to reach? It may not be your general customer base, right? So it's really important to plan and put a huge amount of effort into understanding your sales funnel, right? The states that your users go through as they're engaging with your advertiser, and figure out how to target those different groups and treat them differently. Because for instance, if you have a loyal customer and you give them a really high frequency cap campaign, they may get really annoyed. You can lose customers that way. Whereas if it's somebody you're just trying to reach, you might treat them differently. Different creatives, different delivery rules, different targeting. So you should think about that. As I said, if you don't know, use the tools, right? Most DMPs have the ability to do discovery campaigns or to profile the users on your site to actually give you insights into who's actually on your site, right? I might sell a specialty gin or something, and my primary customers are 21 to 30 males, right? Well, because that's who it's usually shipped to. But you actually go and look at the site, and it turns out there's a whole bunch of 65-plus-year-old ladies that are also on the site buying booze for their sons, right? But the point is that you should be able to actually know that. And how can you target this audience? This is probably the hardest part right now, which is actually tracking down the data and the segments and figuring out how to put together your campaign. But, of course, you have to do that. So same picture as before, but the role of the DMP, right? So if you don't understand DMPs, it's really 4 things. It's collecting data, building targets out of this data, using the targets, and then refining and optimizing on these targets. Those are the things you're looking for, right? So from targeting, it's targeting, pushing targeting details into whatever ad server you're using or DSP you're using. Yeah, and this is important. So whether you're using a DMP that's built into a DSP or one that's independent, doesn't matter. Just make sure that you understand the role of the DMP and how it fits into your business strategy. So if you're here, you're all probably going either into this already or you're not at all. And if you're not into this at all, it's pretty daunting, right? Because there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of hype and vaporware out there as well, and it's very hard to tell how would you actually put this together. So number one, you got to understand capabilities. You don't have to understand everything that's under the hood. What are all the details at a low level? You don't need to understand that, but you need to understand the higher level capabilities, right? So what does this technology allow you to do? How does it work with others, right? So having a plan for your business, and one that's near and dear to my heart is looking for technology partners that support integration with other technologies. The reason for that is just this stuff is hard, right? And anybody who tells you it's super easy is probably not doing a very good job at it. So the more that you can leverage the best in class for these different types of technology, say dynamic creative, data management platform, DSP, the more you can do that, the better, because as your business needs change, you're not talking about swapping out this whole gigantic platform that you're deeply integrated with. And generally, the giant platform that tries to do everything will actually not be nearly as good as working with a specialist in each area. So it's complicated, right? I mean, that's why I'm here talking to you about it. Hopefully, it all makes sense. So if you can figure it out and put it together, that's great. Do it. If you can't, get help, right? There's a lot of experts out there. There's a lot of people doing consulting and specializing in this. And there's a lot of companies that are coming out that are actually putting this together. The industry landscape consolidation is really more about integration and companies that are helping people to bridge this whole spectrum of capabilities. So I have to put in a plug, right, for D3 Media. So this is what we're about. We've only been around since Okay, that's it. So yeah, so I mean, for us, it's pretty much in line with what I just talked about today. We want to leverage the best in breed technology across the entire advertising landscape. From our standpoint, there's a lot of gaps in terms of either things not working together or targeting not working very well. I mean, the fact that in general, a retargeting campaign outperforms behavioral targeting campaigns is a really bad sign, right? Because what's a retargeting campaign? It's a really, really simple behavioral targeting campaign with one data point. Yet generally, it outperforms behavioral targeting. Why is that? Well, it's a good question. So the message I have is, at least for D3 Media and for everybody else, is look at these things. You're not doing a very good job of targeting if that's what you're seeing in terms of results. And I think that it's completely possible to do a very good job with the existing data management platforms that are out there, but you can't just blindly use them. You have to understand how they work and how you're approaching your audience. So for us, we want to drive improvements in targeting and optimization, and help our customers make display work. So.